Welcome, seekers of hidden knowledge, to the mystical realm of the occult. Delve into the secrets of the universe as we journey together into the enigmatic world of ancient wisdom. Brought to you by your guide through the shadows of enlightenment, Wisdom Rocker. Uncover the mysteries, unlock the power, and journey with us as we explore the hidden depths within the pages of forgotten scrolls and ancient texts. Prepare to embark on a journey beyond the ordinary, where wisdom transcends time and knowledge is your greatest ally. Welcome to Wisdom Rocker. Prepare to awaken your inner sage. In this video, we will be uncovering the wisdom within the chapters of
Lectures on Ancient Philosophy. Written by Manly P. Hall. Chapter 11. Mathematics, the Master Science. The Pythagoreans defined mathematics as the science of carat magnitudes and multitudes, for by its principles might be determined not only the number of constituent parts, but also the degree to which one part differs from another in length, breadth, thickness, or weight. Mathematics also makes it possible to compute the interval in time between incidents and in distance between bodies and places. It was regarded as the divine science because order was established by its means throughout the nature of being. All the arts and sciences depend upon this order for their survival. History, for example, is simply a chain of incidents whose order is preceded through arbitrary sequences of time. If this element of time is removed and the incidents are not preserved in chronological order, history becomes valueless, for the proper relationship between episodes is thus destroyed. Only by mathematics, then, is it possible to construct the chain of sequences that will show the definite relationship between a cause and its effect, an action and its reaction, a beginning and its end. Antedating the age of history is the age of fable, from which the time sequence is largely absent, with the resultant confusion concerning theological origins, for the creative processes that required hundreds of millions of years to consummate their work were so thrown out of perspective that up to the last century Christendom actually believed the earth to have been fashioned a little over 6,000 years ago. Fortunately, the laws of nature were their own historiographers, and we find the records of countless ages written in the enduring substances of fossil and geologic strata to refute the erroneous conclusions of men. To the trained thinker, mathematics is obviously limited to the realm of form, or to those departments of manifestation where numbers as diversified elements exist suspended from common unity, which is their monad and which was termed by the Pythagoreans number. As all individual minds are suspended from the principle of mind, so all numbers are suspended from the principle of number. Number is consequently divine and founded in the archetypal sphere, from whence its radiations, or principles, descend into the sensible world, there to manifest as the exactitudes of mathematical procedure. By some, number was considered synonymous with God in that the first motion of deity establishes number, which becomes the mode whereby the magnitude and duration of that motion are rendered conceivable. Hence motion does not exist unless the cause is aware of its own extension or induces awareness in the substances through which the extension is taking place. Motion and number, therefore, are of kindred nature and form the monad from which is suspended all diversified activity, which is number in motion, or the numbers. From the fathomless and unknown beginning the principles of mathematics existed as a divine, unnamed reality. The man accredited with its discovery simply extracted from the infinite the principles of universal order and christened them the science of mathematics. This new science thereupon became a hypothetical monad, and diversity took place within it: arithmetic, algebra, geometry, trigonometry and calculus becoming the vehicles of its expression in the sphere of mental activity. These are the lesser monads suspended from the body of the parent monad. As gold exists in the dark earth long before the miner's pick bears it to the light of day, so all the truths revealed to man in the past and to be discovered by him in the future are eternal and as divine principles were the media in the beginning by which the Creator flowed into being from the eternal state of not being. In its exact sense, truth is therefore the way of God in all things and truths the ways of God in particular things. The forms of learning which mortals term science, philosophy, and theology are simply aspects of divine procedure on the physical, mental and emotional planes respectively. As number becomes numbers, so truth becomes truths and the subordinate monads suspended from truth become that which is real upon each of the countless levels of existence. Wherever one of these facts is established, it becomes the monad or radiant center from which flows forth a number of secondary agencies. The moment this lesser establishment and flow take place, mathematics is again manifested. From the monad of theology, for example, are suspended the religions, of which there are not less than 7 major bodies. The flow of theology into any one of its religions establishes a new vortex, thereby giving expression to another suspended element of mathematics. Each of these major divisions of religion becomes, in turn, the monad of a still greater order of diversity, a notable example being the Christian faith whose branches number several hundred. Each motion of truth out from itself toward that infinite diversity which is the inevitable circumference of unity is thus measured, determined and directionalized by number moving through its own vehicles, numbers and their infinite combinations. The Pythagoreans termed the number 1 as the apex of the pyramid of numbers, since it is the first manifestation of number. It is unity established in place, for in its perfect and abstract sense unity is unlimited by place or condition. Thus, number that is all-pervading becomes the 1, the first numeral to stand alone. Being the least of diversity, the numeral 1 is therefore the spirit of the numbers, for like spirit it is universal life limited to the sphere of generation, or the apex of the pyramid of phenomena. About the central axis of the 1, or tree of being, moves the whole order of the numbers, which are suspended from the 1 even as the 1 itself is suspended from the principle of unity, of which it is the primary mathematical manifestation. Since the 1, which signifies the wholeness of the numbers, is equivalent to divine unity, it is apparent that all the other numerals are fractional parts of this primordial wholeness and not multiples of the 1 as might first be supposed. Thus, 2 is in reality unity considered in terms of halves, 3 is unity considered in terms of thirds, a billion is unity considered in terms of billions. For the imperishable whole, which can never increase or decrease, is always the sum of conceived or conceivable parts. In philosophy the 2 cannot be greater than the 1, for in that event, spirit would exceed the sum of itself and an amount would be greater than its own stated quantity. If the 1 is the symbol of the all in its least conditioned state, the 2 cannot be the all doubled, but is rather to be understood as the having of the absolute within its own nature whereby the all becomes manifested in the least number of parts of itself. Diversity, as symbolized by the numbers, can exist temporarily within the nature of unity, yet the number of the parts can never exceed their own sum, for the integrity of the whole must be preserved. By philosophic addition, therefore, the sum of all the parts, or numerals, must always be the 1, or wholeness. Likewise when parts, or numerals, are subtracted from parts the remainder must be 1, or wholeness, save when the whole is subtracted from the whole, in which event the cipher, or absolute, is left, for when the conditioned is subtracted from the conditioned the unconditioned remains. When parts, or numerals, are multiplied by parts, the product cannot exceed the 1, or wholeness, and when parts, or numerals, are divided by parts, the quotient must be the 1, or wholeness. The order of the numerical pyramid is thus revealed, for from the apex, which is wholeness, it diverges to the base, which consists of an infinity of fragmentary parts. This is the arcane significance of Herodotus' strange statement to the effect that the Egyptians in building their pyramids commenced at the top and worked downward, a method which, because it is an architectonic absurdity, Deary demonstrates that Herodotus wrote history with an ulterior motive. Thus, while the prestige of history may have suffered at the hands of this first historian, the body of philosophy has been enriched by his labors. As the numbers are all contained within the numeral 1, so the pyramid is contained within its own apex, from which it flows down to mingle itself with the rock upon which it stands. In this manner is established the philosophic fact that unity is synonymous with cause and diversity with effect. As the alchemist employed chemical terms to symbolize the various elements of life, so the Pythagoreans gave to the creative sphere the appellation of number and to the creation which issued therefrom, numbers. The divine mathematics dealt not with sums calculated upon paper nor carried in the mind, but rather with the order and arrangement of corporeal bodies, their mutual relationships and the proximity of each to its own cause. Though any one of the arts or sciences is capable of thus becoming the outer garment of the secret doctrine, the various Greek schools employed particularly mathematics, music and astronomy in this manner. Like Herodotus, they frequently confused the elements of the science itself in order that the esoteric principles, which were often diametrically opposed to the exoteric application, might be presented to such as were able to interpret the symbolism. Through mathematics, then, is set forth the system of philosophic monadology, the principles of which were arcanely hinted at by Leucippus and Democritus. From the doctrine of monads sprang the theory of atoms, which are simply these archetypal unities of wholeness vested in matter and established as the principles of substance. These atoms exist in concatenated order from the infinitesimally small to the unmeasurably great, each of the greater being compounded according to atomic law from a prescribed number to the lesser. An important point is established when the question is asked, what do all of these atoms have in common, leaving out of consideration the factors of size and order? Two things: their participation in the all-inclusive atom composed of their sum, the condition of individual wholeness which each atom occupies in relationship to itself, though to greater unities it occupies the relationship of a part. This quality of wholeness, which is the common property of these diversified and otherwise irreconcilable bodies, becomes as it were, their common denominator. Though wholeness is present in all natures, it is not an attribute of natures. This wholeness is an archetypal quality, an attribute of deity. Regardless of the nature of its expression, every activity, quality, or condition is essentially a wholeness. This wholeness is made manifest by a division within itself whereby its nature becomes a mass of innumerable fragments, each of the fractions partaking of the quality resident in the original wholeness and manifesting it through the wholeness of its own fractional part. For example, man is a wholeness possessing and manifesting certain rational qualities and characteristics. This archetypal wholeness, flowing into diversity, breaks up to form men. Each individual, by virtue of his own inherent wholeness, shares in the virtues resident in the wholeness of the archetype, and by virtue of his participation in the one causal nature moves in the rhythm of the archetype, which archetype manifests through such laws as polarity, generation, rationality, morality, and such other ideals and practices as are the common property of all men. Let us take the principle of unities, or wholes, and apply it to the subject of duration. Man forever struggles against the illusion of time. He views the marching years as relentless enemies conspiring to prevent achievement. His eyes forever watch the clock's swinging pendulum which ticks his life away. In the third part of King Henry VI, the monarch indulges in this soliloquy. See the minutes, how they run. How many make the hour full complete? How many hours bring about the day? How many days finish up the year? How many years a mortal man may live? The great expanse of duration, in which like a great sea all existence is immersed, is divided by the unenlightened into three hypothetical intervals: the past, the present and the future. These intervals were personified by the Greeks, who called them the fates and invested them with power over the destinies of all mortal creatures, or more correctly, the mortal parts of all creatures. To most men the past is a period of vain regrets, the present a sterile struggle against apparently insurmountable obstacles, and the future that fourth-dimensional vista where alone dreams come true. Thus, hope, faith and charity come into their own, for with his hope posited in tomorrow, his faith supporting him in today and with charity toward yesterday, man faces the illusion of years, at the end of which Cronus, time, awaits to devour his own progeny. Every moment both marks the beginning of a new period of time and also the close of some expiring interval. Upon this intricate background of minutes, hours and days, humanity fashioned strange workmanships, the products of its imagings and its imaginings. Time is both a creator and a destroyer, for it is a perpetual beginning as well as an end to something. In time all that is false shall pass away, and in time all that is true shall be realized and established. Time is the acid test, and only that which can survive its ravages is worthy to be termed permanent. Time has dominion over all that is untrue, unreal or perverse. One by one the fallacies of life fall beneath the reaping scythe of time and are garnered into the capacious bin of oblivion. In time all forms must die, in time all worlds must cease, in time the very universe will be resolved back into its primal state, in time are contained all beginnings and all ending, for time is the lord of the illusion of beginnings and endings. Time is the master of the mortal sphere and all that exists within it. Time preserves for a little while the perishable, only that ultimately it shall perish more completely. Within form, however, there is that which is without beginning and without end, something that laughs at the years and mocks destroying time. This enduring quality is that wholeness which rejoices in the annihilation of those forms which are the diversity temporarily established within the sphere of this all-containing unity. From the viewpoint of wholeness, the more that is destroyed the more remains, until when everything has been destroyed, all remains, for as the unity of number is broken up by numbers, so the unity of life is broken up by forms. Hence, by destroying form, time restores life to its perfect wholeness. Mortal creatures come and go in kaleidoscopic diversity, yet in the midst of this ever-changing scene is an intangible but all-pervading and inclusive permanence, the divine reality, the self, the perfect wholeness. Unborn and undying, the self is neither old nor young. Its condition never changes, for though all things pass away, it endures. It is wholeness, and being wholeness is sufficient unto itself, for that which is complete is sufficient and that which is all is enough for itself. As time is the measure of parts, it cannot affect that which is superior to the existence of parts and which consequently knows no time. Time is recognized and measured by the markings it leaves upon the face of ephemeral being. Though it deeply scores the surface of all material life, it can have no effect upon the enduring nature of reality, for wholeness, being wholeness, includes time. The parts can have but a fractional share of the attributes of the whole, but the whole partakes of the attributes of the parts in fullness and perfect harmony. Hence the whole is the master of its parts, which must bow before its dictum and are powerless to force their fragmentary agencies upon the structure of wholeness itself. Those who live material lives, who think and feel in terms of matter and estimate permanence upon the basis of corporeal substance, must forever fear time, which sooner or later will wrest their possessions from them and scar their personality with its blows. But those who have risen above the illusion of years realize, as they gaze upon the immeasurable vistas of eternity, that the law of the spirit is permanence, and the law of matter is change. Time may well be the measure of corporeal being, but what is time to that which remains unmoved, and against which impotently pound the waves of interval? Numbers partake of the maya of diversity, for they are infinite in their combinations and their progression is limited only by the rational capacity of the mathematician. So we find the Pythagorean declaring the monad, or the one, to signify reality, but the duad, or the two, illusion. Coincident with division, the ephemeral state is manifested, for the laws of polarity for which the two stands limit the generating soul to the narrow confines of definite procedure, which procedure at best can but inadequately represent the essentially unimpeded flowing of the causal nature. An attempt has been made to demonstrate that time is the mysterious fourth dimension so long sought by philosophers. The proponents of this theory declare that it is impossible to completely isolate any existing object from the element of time and that the failure to include this clement destroys the congruity of the object under consideration. Time is a phase or manifestation of place, for that which because of its abstract nature cannot be said to exist in place may, however, be localized in time. For example, the moment an incident is closed, or a personality is dissipated, it may be considered to have disappeared from place but to be still definitely situated in time. Time is an elastic quality which is ever great enough to include both place and occurrence. Therefore, an object may be declared to require four descriptive properties in order to render it intelligible to the senses: length, breadth, thickness, and place. Neither time nor place, however, can be conceived of as actually fulfilling the conventional requirements of dimensions, and in approaching the problem of the fourth dimension, it is evident that we are attempting its solution with a three-dimensional consciousness. Hence our methods of approach must necessarily be through hypothesis and negative procedure. Let us assume two cubes of the same size to be composed of spirit and matter respectively. Cube A, spirit, is the causal nature of cube B, its material vehicle. The all-permeating quality of cube A permits it to occupy the same place that is occupied by cube B, so that by virtue of their composition both bodies may occupy the same place at the same time. But cube A and cube B are not the same. Consequently, an interval exists between them, the same type of interval that might exist between two mentalities, one of which is highly evolved and the other of comparatively negligible development. The interval between spirit and matter is, therefore, an interval of quality, and when so considered may be as incalculably great as is the interval between God and man. How shall we measure this interval? How shall we accurately ascertain the distance between two bodies occupying precisely the same place at the same time, yet separated by a chasm so vast that the one may be totally unaware of the existence of the other? Throughout creation there are distances which are purely qualitative. In estimating the nature of an object, length, breadth, thickness and quality reveal more of its nature than do length, breadth, thickness and time or place, for both time and place are environmental attributes, while quality is purely intrinsic. It is not a justifiable inference, however, that quality is the fourth dimension, but rather that the interval of quality is the field whose true dimensions, proportions and conditions can only be estimated or measured by a fourth tool of the reason, an instrument akin to reason itself. In addition to the properties of length, breadth and thickness, every object has also a quality extension toward the nature of perfect good. This quality extension comes under the influence of time only to the degree that quality determines permanence and time measures the degree of impermanence. The theory of relativity, by establishing the fallibility of present methods of estimating the relationships between objects, proves that all conclusions concerning celestial dynamics must be relative, or true only in part. Relating two bodies to each other is a comparatively simple problem, however, to that of relating an object which is in place to a spiritual principle which is universal. If a spiritual principle is omnipresent at all times, then no object can ever be moved so that it either approaches closer to or retires farther from spirit, for spirit has its center everywhere and its circumference nowhere. The interval between spirit, cube A, and matter, cube B, is, therefore, hardly a proper subject for relativity, but must be regarded rather as a lapse of quality. In other words, it is an interval which exists without distance, since distance cannot exist unless both objects under consideration occupy place. To attempt to establish distance between these two opposites of quality represented by spirit and matter would be like standing in a certain spot and asking the question, how far is it from here to everywhere? The correct answer, as far as here is less than everywhere, is almost as baffling to the faculties of comprehension as the question. Such an interval can only be properly surveyed and subdivided by one fortunate enough to possess the fourth-dimensional consciousness, which would enable him to travel through the quality interval with the same facility that we pass through the place interval. The popular fallacy that God dwells in the furthermost angle of the heavens and must be hymned in triple fortissimo arises from the dimension limitations of human consciousness, for the mind untrained in abstractions, confuses the interval of quality with the interval of distance. The mind concludes that if evil be near, good, its opposite, consequently must be far removed, and the distance between them can be estimated by a highly spiritualized yardstick. Thus, distance may be defined as the interval between two given bodies, places, incidents, or conditions. The methods employed to measure these intervals differ, according to the nature of the intervals themselves. For example, the interval between bodies or places may be estimated by the arbitrary standards of distance, the interval between incidents by the arbitrary standards of time, and the interval between conditions by the arbitrary standards of quality. When limited to the interval between physical objects or places, distance can be calculated with reasonable accuracy, for men have established definite laws of measurement by common agreement. Such methods of computation, however, are wholly inadequate in almost unexplored spheres of consciousness and mind, concerning the natures of which most men differ widely one from the other. It has been said that the philosopher may travel around the world while seated on his own hearthstone, for thought annihilates the interval of distance. A man thinks of China and, behold, he is in China, for he must always dwell in the midst of his own thoughts. But with what subtle instruments shall we measure the wide interval through which thought sped in its instantaneous passage to Cathay? Certainly the tape is not made that meets the need. Again, realization eliminates the intervals in consciousness. For through realization the one realizing becomes identical with the thing realized and thus, spans the superphysical interval between the self and the not-self. Into this interval self is ceaselessly flowing, and by the gradual elimination of this qualitative interval the fractional part ever mingles itself more completely with the whole. Nirvana may be defined as the ultimate annihilation of every interval of quality, for it marks the point to which the lesser self has been caused to approach and finally to be merged with its ultimate goal, the greater self. Mathematics enables the investigator of the abstract verities of the philosophic sphere to organize his findings and present them intelligently to a world so limited in consciousness that it is incapable of imagining conditions apart from place, or intervals unmeasurable in terms of distance. In presenting any abstract reality for consideration by the concrete faculties, something must necessarily be lost, for truth cannot be brought down to the level of ignorance without the element of ignorance entering into the equation and thereby detracting from the integrity of truth. Mathematics, however, offers a medium whereby such pollution is reduced to a minimum. For example, it would be highly ridiculous to attempt to estimate in terms of physical distance how far life is from death, heaven from hell, or opinion from fact. Recognizing that the law of generation works through the principle of opposites, it is nevertheless a justifiable assumption that the total interval between two opposites is equivalent to unity, or the one. This totality is then capable of being reduced to halves, quarters, and other forms of division. The numbers will then represent concatenated degrees of quality, and a definite scale is thereby established which will permit the various forms manifesting these qualities to be accurately determined in relation to the scheme through which they are moving. Thus, while it is difficult to compute the distance between growth and decay, maturity may be fixed as the halfway point. The evolution of human consciousness may be measured in a similar way, for the entire interval between unconsciousness and consciousness can be conceived of as divisible into thirds. The first division confers no realization beyond the limitations of place, the second no realization beyond the limitations of interval, and the third no realization beyond the limitations of quality. By such mathematical procedure it is possible to determine the age of a soul, for the interval between beginning and end, being understood as a wholeness, the position of the manifesting life at any given time may be determined by the degree of its own quality in relation to the total privation of that quality, which was its source, and the fullness of that quality, which is its ultimate. Philosophy employs such terms as young souls and old souls. A young soul is one who in quality is more proximate to source than to ultimate, or in whom the degree of privation of a given quality exceeds the amount of the quality itself. If there is more of the absence of a quality present than there is of the quality itself, then the quality is declared to be negative. If the reverse is true, the quality is declared to be positive. Using 100% to represent the sum total of the interval between any two conditions or states, the relative perfection of a life in the plan of progress is determined by the proportion its position bears to the total interval. Thus, an individual manifesto's 90% of a certain quality is 9/10 of the way across the interval that lies between the total privation and the fullness of that quality. To summarize, the intervals of quality, in common with the calculations of all superphysical elements, must be established upon the basis of totality or wholeness, and growth or change is always computed as a percentage of that basis. Hence, in calculating spiritual progress, each of us must calculate it in terms of fractions, parts, or percentages as related to the wholeness of being. At this point it may not be out of place to reproduce Proclus' encomium to the science of mathematics. Hence, the business of this science is apparent from its name, for it moves knowledge, excites intelligence, purifies the dianoetic part, unfolds the forms which we essentially contain, removes the oblivion and ignorance which we possess from generation, and dissolves the bonds with which we are held in captivity by an irrational nature. And all this it effects according to a real similitude of that divinity, Mercury, who leads into light intellectual gifts, fills all things with divine reason, moves souls to intellect, excites them as from a profound sleep, converts them by inquiry to themselves, perfects them through obstetrication, and through the invention of pure intellect conducts them to a blessed life. In the Platonic theory of converging nullities is revealed a strange doctrine concerning negative affirmations and affirmative negations. The number 1 is a positive affirmative number in that it sets forth in unequivocal terms certain divine attributes of reality, namely, unity, inclusiveness, priority, and stability. On the other hand, we may have a negative statement, as God is no thing. This is an affirmative negation in that nothing exceeds thing in the quality of excellence, for the removal of a definite state leaves an indefinite state partaking more perfectly of divine qualities. Whereas the 1 is similar to the nature of divinity, the 2 is dissimilar in that it is the symbol of contraries and separation. Hence, while divinity can be defined affirmatively by the 1, it must be defined negatively by the 2, for God is like the 1 and unlike the 2. In other words, numbers define deity negatively, number, affirmatively. The numbers, consequently, are negative affirmations, and deity is defined negatively by every form in the universe, for forms resemble deity in their unity and differ from deity in their diversity. An affirmation is a definite declaration of opinion, belief or attitude and, if true, inclines toward and becomes identical with truth. If the affirmation be false, however, it retires from truth as though abashed, thus, negatively affirming truth by declaring itself to be dissimilar. A negation is an affirmation through denial and is the only method by which the absolute may be approached. When the negation verges toward the thing negated, it nullifies its negative correspondences in that thing, so only that which is remains. Thus, affirmatives give definition by investing power with place, condition and quality, while negatives, by divesting the absolute of these defining limitations, restore it to the estate of supreme dignity. In this manner is created the paradox that affirmations pertaining to first cause are negations and negations are affirmations. Theological systems founded upon the premise of an anthropomorphic deity assume duality to be ultimate and therefore, invest the two with a dignity superior to the one, which is a concept platonically unsound. The two is the symbol of good and evil, and the entire illusion of sequences has its foundation in the duad, the monad of diversity. According to the Pythagoreans, the two is an evil or unholy number because it is the archetype of separateness and produces from itself a dual standard which is now accepted as the manifestation of a dual creative principle. Thus, we are given a key to the intrinsic natures of good and evil, for good continually inclines toward unity or wholeness, and being ever the same amalgamates with everything good, so that diversity can never exist therein. Evil, on the other hand, is widely diversified and may exist in many conditions or states, all of which are irreconcilable not only to good but also to each other. While the body of good is always a unity, the body of evil is always a diversity, for evil does not coordinate with itself. For example, a virtue is good and the manifestation of virtue produces an action to which the nature of good is intrinsic. Blending with the ever-existing good, the good act becomes a part thereof, thereby enriching, strengthening and increasing the entire body of good. Conversely, a vice is evil and must remain as an isolated activity, since it is incapable either of being accepted into the nature of good or of attaching itself to the body of evil, as the element of concord is not common to the intrinsic nature of evil. Hence, good ever fortifies its own nature, while evil undermines itself by the ceaseless warfare between its own parts. In the unification of one good with another, the power of good is accordingly magnified. When one evil comes in contact with another evil, in the ensuing struggle each evil destroys the effectiveness of the other. In this way it becomes apparent that good, possessing the virtue of unity, must ever increase until it includes everything within its own nature, while evil, in which the principle of diversity is inherent, will ultimately destroy itself by the continual controversy between its parts. It has been well said that two evils do not make one good, but attacking each other achieve their mutual destruction and by self-elimination thus, prepare the way for the irresistible progress of good. For this reason the Pythagoreans declared that the perfect numbers, the sum of whose fractional parts is equal to themselves, are the most rare, whereas the superabundant numbers, the sum of whose fractional parts is greater than themselves, and the deficient numbers, the sum of whose fractional part is less than themselves, are most common. This is based upon the fact that there are many ways by which any definite end may be accomplished, but only one of those ways is the best. Consequently he alone is wise who can recognize the best, and he alone is strong who has the courage to use this method, regardless of the personal peril or responsibility involved. Therefore, while all natures partake to some degree of the good, only that is true which partakes in fullest measure of the good, and only one who is qualified to recognize good can make a rational choice between a number of bodies with qualitative differences. Concerning the doctrine of perfections as revealed by numbers, Thomas Taylor, in his Theoretic Arithmetic, sums up in the following words the opinions of Nicomachus, Macrobius and Theon of Smyrna. Perfect numbers, therefore, are beautiful images of the virtues which are certain media between excess and defect and are not summits, as by some of the ancients they were supposed to be. And evil indeed is opposed to evil, but both are opposed to one good. Good, however, is never opposed to good, but to two evils at one and the same time. Thus, timidity is opposed to audacity, to both, of which the want of true courage is common, but both timidity and audacity are opposed to fortitude. Craft also is opposed to fatuity, to both, of which the want of intellect is common, and both these are opposed to prudence. Thus, too, profusion is opposed to avarice, to both, of which a liberality is common, and both these are opposed to liberality. And in a similar manner in the other virtues, by all, of which it is evident that perfect numbers have a great similitude to the virtues. But they also resemble the virtues on another account, for they are rarely found, as being few, and they are generated in a very constant order. On the contrary, an infinite multitude of superabundant and diminished numbers may be found, nor are they disposed in any orderly series, nor generated from any certain end, and hence they have a great similitude to the vices, which are numerous, inordinate and indefinite. For further details on this subject consult the chapter on Pythagorean mathematics in my recent work, an encyclopedic outline of Masonic, Hermetic, Kabbalistic and Rosicrucian symbolical philosophy. As the one represents the monad of unity, so the two as the monad of diversity is the moving spirit of irrationality. The conflict between rationality and irrationality may be likened to the proverbial concept of the two ends fighting the middle. Extremes are basically irrational, and only the point of equilibrium may be said to be established upon an enduring foundation. Furthermore, as the extremes pertain to the secondary creation, they are illusional when compared to the center, which is the primary and enduring creation. Thus, height and depth are both opposed to the center, for depth departs from the center in a downward course and height in an upward course. That which departs from center departs from balance, which is a principle exploited to its ultimate by Akihara Shirobiai in the theory of judo or jujitsu. The theory underlying judo starts from the mathematical principle that the stability of a body is destroyed as soon as the vertical line passing through its center of gravity falls outside its base. Once the individual is lured into jeopardizing his equilibrium, he becomes his own worst enemy and requires little outside assistance to bring about his downfall. The philosophic truth here revealed applies not only to the body but to the consciousness as well. When the self in equilibrium, signified by the one, is intrigued to incline from its perfect state toward the extremes, signified by the two, it jeopardizes its stability and is at the mercy of its adversary, diversity. Let the one signify permanence and the two life and death. Both life and death share the common vice of impermanence, as the both lack the common virtue of permanence. Therefore, it is as fatal for the one to incline toward life as toward death, for to assuming life it assumes that which must die, and in assuming death it assumes that which is corruptible and changeable. Only when dissociated from both is the perfection of endurance assured. Thus, is revealed the stability of number and the instability of numbers, for all numbers, save the one, partake of the common evil of manyness and are involved in the process of generation, whereby imperfection perpetuates itself since it is incapable of enduring in its own nature. The self exists independent of generation in that, being indivisible, it is incorruptible, but the not-self, being divisible and corruptible, depends for its endurance upon generation and the renewal of its transitory bodies. Between the rational soul and mathematics is the sympathetic bond of similars. Preciseness, which is an attribute, see the good, delights in precision, and order, which is a quality of number, rejoices in the continuity of similars and retire from the malarrangements of dissimilars. In facing inward toward its own intrinsic perfection, the self becomes number regarding no number, or that cipher which precedes numeration. But facing outward toward bodies, it encounters the numerical classifications of orders and projections and therefore stands in equilibrium between not being, which is the perfect and eternal being, and transitory being, which, in the terms of the ultimate, is not being. Thus, self, the individual, is the monad of secondary natures and the paternal foundation of progeny, which are tertiary natures. Hence the one, which is the monad or archetype of good, and the two, which is the monad or archetype of evil, are both declared by the Pythagoreans to be no numbers but sacred qualities, namely, the primary and secondary natures. The three, or monad of tertiary natures, was regarded as the actual parent of numbers, or progeny, for three is a blending of similars, the one, and dissimilars, the two, and is consequently the proper foundation of compound bodies, which compounds must always consist of similars and dissimilars. Similars being the spiritual and abiding parts and dissimilars the material and transitory parts. From the various orders of similars and dissimilars issue the multiplicities which are alluded to as the cogitations of divine mind. Thus, the first trinity consists of the monad, the Father, the duad, the power, and the triad, the mind or monad of generations, for all generations consist of a rational nature, the monad, immersed in an irrational nature, the duad, toward some phase of which the monad inclines, or seems to incline, during the irrational epoch. Liberation, therefore, is the retirement of the monad from proximity to opposites and the re-establishment of its own self-sufficiency by which it is capable of assimilating the qualities of the dissimilars and returning to its true abiding condition as the paternal foundation of generations. Syrianus, the Pythagorean, declared that the wise, turning from the vulgar paths, delivered their philosophy in secret to those alone who were worthy to receive it and exhibited it to the rest of mankind through mathematical terminology. Forms therefore, they called numbers as being the first thing separated from impartible union, for such natures as are above form are also above separation and consequently pertain to the sphere of number itself. The sacred decade, or 10, is generated from the sum of the first four numbers, considering the 1 and 2 as numbers, 1, 2, 3, and 4. The 1 was termed the first point, the 2 the first interval, the 3 the first superficies, and the 4 the first solid. Thus, Aristotle declared that the first permanence is the dot, the first length the duad, the first breadth the triad, and the first depth the tetrad. The nature of the tetrad, being that of the first solid or body, reveals why it is declared to be the symbol of God. The 4 is the demiurgus, whose substantial nature is the proper field of mundane fabrications. As 4 surfaces are the least number that can enclose an area, so the demiurgus is the first of areas or fields, and consequently the one in whom we live and move and have our being. Pythagoras further declared that knowledge existed in 4 states. The first, similar to the monad, was called intellect. The second, similar to the duad, science. The third, similar to the triad, opinion. And the fourth, similar to the tetrad, sense. It is evident that intellect partakes of the solidarity of the monad, for it is the immovable contemplation of relative mutations. The duad even fulfills the Baconian requirements for the constitution of science, for the 2 establishes the comparisons essential to the accumulation of knowledge through observation and experimentation. The 3 consists of 3 monads separated by 2 intervals. These intervals become the proper symbols of opinion, for opinions are founded not upon facts, monads, but upon the intervals between them, and 2 intervals are necessary for opinions in that opinions exhibit the qualities of dissimilars. The 4 consists of 4 monads and 3 intervals, which intervals may be likened to the dimensions, length, breadth, thickness, for the monads are qualities manifesting in intervals or dimensions by which they are rendered appreciable to the sense perceptions. Thus, the hidden symbolism of the tetractys, or pyramid of 10 dots, is unveiled. The 4 rows of dots further signify 4 qualities: form, order, beauty, unity, imperishably related to number. These qualities partake of excellence and through their participation in the order of creation render the whole felicitous to the internal constitution. Their presence ensures the comparative excellence of forms and bodies. As already intimated, every compound body is composed of the qualities of the monad and the duad. Aristotle reminds the disciple that a number, such as the 6 for example, partakes of the nature of the duad in that it is composed of parts, i.e., nomonads, but it also partakes of the monad itself in that these parts form a whole, the 6, and the question naturally arises, by what virtue do a number of monads group together to form a definite wholeness to which an arbitrary term is given? In other words, why do 6 monads make 6 rather than simply 6 monads? For the 6 is not denominated 6 L's but a unity composed of 6. As the Pythagoreans explain it, the 6 monads may be considered as 6 pieces of wood from which is fashioned a chair which we will call the number 6 itself. By what virtue do these 6 separate objects form a new and definite pattern, and why should they not always remain simply a bundle of wood? If the numbers were merely aggregations of monads, they would all be bundles, differing simply in the number of their parts. By virtue of a divine order, however, these parts are made to pattern themselves into new terms. The Platonists declared that as a carpenter fashioned a new object out of the separate elements, so a mysterious agent called the numerative soul, being itself a monad and consequently a wholeness composed of infinite diversity, gives form and subsistence to all numbers according to definite divine laws. But Thomas Taylor concludes, in this only consists the difference, that the carpenter's art is not naturally inherent in us and requires manual operation, because it is conversant with sensible matter, but the numerative art is naturally present with us and is therefore possessed by all men and has an intellectual matter which it instantaneously invests with form. In the light of Pythagoreanism, it is no cause for amazement that 6 monads are never without the innate sense of sixness, for the moment a certain number of units are combined they are ensouled by the quality equal to their sum and invested with an organized formative nature through which they manifest a wholeness where previously they manifested a separateness. It follows that with the establishment of sums these sums are automatically invested by the rational soul of man himself with the sense of wholeness equal to their number. If 3, for example, be taken from 6, that which remains is immediately invested with the wholeness of 3. We must give form to numeration, for our soul cannot endure to see that which is formless, unadorned, especially as she possesses the power of investing it with ornament. The soul naturally desires the adornment of wholeness, and recognizing this intrinsic urge is pleased to confer it upon other natures. Forms are consequently the sense of wholeness superimposed upon parts by the rational soul, to the end that these forms are no longer regarded as bundles of monads but as definite structures. To summarize, the world is an infinite number of monads grouped into an infinite diversity of patterns, each pattern invested in a quality called form, which quality is measured by the quantity of the monadic parts. The world is adorned with numbers which hang upon it as ornaments upon the person. Each group of numbers is capable of infinite division, but whether in its divided or undivided state, it in turn is adorned with an infinite diversity of unities or wholes which issue forth in response to the urge of the rational soul to clothe abstractions in denominating natures. Thus, the law which governs the increase and decrease of wholes and the superimposition of wholeness upon number, is a manifestation of a divine urge within the numerative monad, which is termed number and is a definite attribute of cause itself. In this manner we mathematically demonstrated how man, the unconditioned principle, is obscured by men, the infinite diversity, how mind, the yellow emperor, is hidden in the midst of minds which think in many terms and with many results, but which reason all toward the same end. We behold the Creator so veiled by his creations that his own dignity is no longer apparent but is absorbed into the effulgence of his spheres. As we gaze forth upon the universal vista we see the veils behind which stand the divine principles, the immovable causes of motion, the ungenerated causes of generation, the undying causes of life and death. Our external parts reach forth to grasp the external substance earth the all. Our tiny fingers reach out to pluck the stars from their thrones and our outer being bows with veneration before the outer substances that are its very self and from which it was mined in the primordial day. Meanwhile our inner selves, the invisible cause of our visible activity, yearn to be mingled with the spirit of cosmos.
Thanks for watching the Wisdom Rocker. Don't forget to like, comment, and share.